Hello and welcome to the League One Lowdown, brought to you by the Deck Podcast Network with myself, Seb Jones, joined as ever by Jamie Johnson. Jamie, how are you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you, Seb. And for part of the reason being what we're going to talk about later on with the South Yorkshire Derby victory earlier on today. So yeah, very good in my part of the world. How about yourself?
Yes, well, similar likewise, not quite a South Yorkshire derby, but certainly a Yorkshire derby victory that we will get into. So yeah, myself and Jamie both were very happy with the results in terms of our own sides, and hopefully you guys are all happy with the results that involve your sides as well. We are going to look, as usual, in six sort of go into detail in six games from the League One games on Saturday, and then we're going to just sort of run through and cover the other six towards the end. We'll start with a team we've not really spoke about in detail, and that is Exeter City. And I guess sort of coming away with a victory that wasn't quite expected, Jim, it's fair to say.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of bury the lead in a way, but we're going to come to talk about Darren Ferguson and the issues at Peterborough in a second. Exeter won 3-0, really comprehensive victory, and they've really put things right. I know I was pretty I don't know if we've spoke about them since the opening day of the season, but I was pretty scathing about them when they played Doncaster on the opening day because they were really they looked so poor. And then since then, they've really turned the corner. We did speak about them when they played Blackpool, and they looked pretty good in that game. And they put things right, and now they're looking really sharp. And they played well here. Two up top they had. Gary Caldwell deserves his plaudits for that because that worked really well. And they were very difficult to break down. That was one of Peterborough's real problems. They just couldn't get through Exeter, and they had just the one shot on target, despite seeing plenty of the ball at times during the game. There is plenty of negatives to talk about for Peterborough, the horrendous defending, and they were really sort of bullied at times. But Exeter have inflicted that, and they were very strong. And McGuinness did McGuinness things up top, and they just looked back to being a pretty solid League One team, which they always have been in the past, and they've been a bit up and down, but they looked pretty good in this game. They looked really good, actually, in fact, to give the credit where it's due. And Exeter, if they can keep going like this, they could have a pretty decent season, really. But they were playing Peterborough, and we do have to talk about that side of things. But Exeter, well deserving of their 3 points, and they're looking pretty good at the minute.
Yeah, I guess before we go into Peterborough, you mentioned sort of there that they are pretty up and down. And that's probably sums it superbly. They've had six league games so far this season, three victories, three defeats, currently sit 11th place. That's something that they probably need to work on, really, in becoming a bit more consistent in terms of their results. Yes, obviously today we've seen a brilliant performance, but they're not able to do that every week, which is must be quite disappointing and disheartening.
Yeah, and you say that the three losses, three wins. It's been in that win loss pattern as well. They've been flip flopping on results. They play Rotherham next week, who were another side I was disappointed by in terms of their performance against Doncaster. So that could be a chance. And really, that they play like they did against Peterborough, they should be beating Rotherham in terms of current form. And they have as inconsistent, a big pardon, as they've been. They did really look well in this game. And Wareham and McGuinness, he had two. They're both on the score sheet. The assists were spread around, people chipping in. And the first goal in particular is one that is a really positive sign, I think, for Exeter, because they sort of picked up the scraps and they fought harder than Peterborough to win the ball back from the seconds and then put it into the middle. And they got the goal. And they just fought harder than Peterborough, which is a very worrying sign for them. But Exeter putting those extra few yards in, and that makes a big difference. And yeah, I don't know how many times I can say it. Really, they just looked really good in this game. Surprisingly so, really, that how well they have turned that corner from the opening day. And this was a good performance.
Yeah, Josh McGuinness on the score sheet has scored at least 10 league goals in the last three seasons. So certainly a good trick to have up their sleeve in terms of an Exeter point of view. We'll come on to Peterborough now in terms of well, not just the result, but in terms of the start of the season as a whole. They currently sit 24th, and I know we only 6 games in, but it's not a great sign. So, to bottom of the table after 6 games, one draw, 5 defeats. 2 goals for, 11 goals against across those games. It just hasn't been a great start to the season at all, has it, for Darren Ferguson's side?
Yeah, that's, or is it pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? Really, it's just they're woeful really at the minute, and they've put the work in. I don't want to lay it on too thick, but it's true, isn't it? I mean, they've had an absolutely awful start to the season. Everyone talks about, and rightfully so, of how many players they lose, Peterborough, and through a really good transfer model and through some issues they've had as well in terms of players moving on when perhaps they could have done with keeping them for an extra couple of years. But they've had a good summer recruitment-wise. They've brought in a lot of players. They've brought in a lot of players who should turn into quality at that club. But that quality isn't there yet. And that is the issue they're sort of falling into. It's all about building for the future, and everyone has to do it, and you have to future-proof. But the now is a real issue for Peterborough. And I mentioned how poor they were defensively, how much they were just bullied, like outworked in this game, and it's all really negative signs. And Darren McAntony, of course, does his Hard Truths podcast, and something he spoke about on there sort of a week and a bit ago now, but about how lucky he said how lucky his manager is in that he's got an owner that will keep spending money. And there becomes a point, one of the quotes he said on his podcast, need to work harder and get wins. And it's pretty simple. If they're not winning games, the manager's going to start coming into trouble, because you either point the finger at the recruitment and McAntony, or you point the finger at Darren Ferguson and the coaching and not being able to get enough out of those players. And I think in a battle between who gets their finger pointed at most, I think Ferguson's going to lose that particular battle, really. His head will fall first. And I think there is real danger if they don't turn it around very quickly. And obviously, with the end of the transfer window on Monday night, to put a cheap plug in for our live stream, myself and Sam will be part of that in the early stages. But it's a whole wide the deck live stream for the deadline day. So across socials, we'll be there on Monday night. But they have a little bit work to do overall, but it's not really transfers. They've put a lot of that effort in transfer-wise and recruitment-wise already this summer, and it's not coming off yet. And I think those fingers are going to start to be turned towards Dan Ferguson, and then it's a slippery slope from there in. And we have to remember how poor they were last season as well. So a corner needs to be turned quickly, otherwise I think he could be in danger, Dan Ferguson.
But you're absolutely right in that sort of other sides, not necessarily just in League One, but other sides that perhaps struggle at this time of year. Often, sort of the first port of call is who need a couple of bodies to strengthen, who they're lacking a bit of depth in certain areas. This area, well, that's not the case with Peterborough. Really, they got the business done early, like you mentioned. They got the sort of, I guess, planned ahead in terms of key departures over summer as well, and brought in the players quickly to replace the gaps that were left. And having the window open for a couple of days is not going to help them at the minute. That's not the sort of support they need. They need the players that they brought in to get firing, really. And if they don't get firing after 6 games, then when do they get firing? Because they a lot of them are brought to the club so early on. They've had pre-season together. They've had a lot of time beforehand as well. They've obviously had the 6 league games so far this season to gel, and it's not clicking really. So it is about this sort of time where things go, "Ooh, do we need to change? Do we need to change?" And I think I absolutely agree with you in that if there was a club to make a change from the managerial point of view, I think Peterborough would be right up there in terms of favourites, really, in terms of making that swap, which would be a shame, really, because given the work that Darren Ferguson has put in whilst he's been at the club. But you're right in terms of manager versus owner, who's got more power, who's going to more likely get the finger pointed at. Well, the manager's going to more likely get the finger pointed at, which leaves it sort of owner in out of the mud a little bit. But yeah, I think there are some deeper issues. I think at Peterborough, it's just they are just slowly sort of coming to fruition because results aren't going their way at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point in terms of sort of wider problems. We sort of talked about how much depth they have in that recruitment, and they brought in some good players, but perhaps the good players they brought in, and they bring in players from non-league who perhaps there's no perhaps they will become good players in the future, but they're not good players now, and they need good
Immediately,
players
yeah,
now. And that sort of is the balancing act. And Darren Ferguson probably needs to be getting more out of his players. There's no doubt about that. They've spent the money, they've brought in some quality, and they're not getting enough out of it. When there's teams in this division who haven't got money, who haven't spent much this summer, and they are winning games and they are putting in good performances, and they just look so lacking. It's the energy and the effort as well. That it's got to be a real concern, and it just needs a big shake-up, I think. And there's only one way of doing that, really. Would I go as far as to say his days are numbered? I don't know it, because things can turn around very, very quickly, and you win one game, you win two, and you can go on a run. But if things carry on for much longer as they are, I think Darren Ferguson is in an all host of trouble.
Yeah, a couple of results and things can quickly change in football. Absolutely right. We mentioned there sort of Peterborough yet to pick up their first win of the season. Well, that was the case for Reading up until Saturday, where they managed to claim their first 3 points of the season. And I think, Jamie, definitely overdue in this one.
Yeah, of two teams who obviously wanted to get the monkey off their back in terms of the first win. Port Vale weren't able to do so, but Reading at home able to get that first win. I spoke to Andy Preston, who we had on the podcast a couple of times towards the back end of last season, talking in very negative times, obviously, about their ownership problems, but much happier he was this afternoon. A game that lacked quality, but it doesn't really matter how they got that victory. It was just the important aspect of getting it. And Paddy Lane's goal made the difference. A really nice finish for him in the second half after a very slow and steady first 45 minutes. He was the only player, actually, Paddy Lane, who played in midweek, started in midweek in the cup game. They made 10 changes from game to game. And Paddy Lane, the only player left, was the one who provided the difference in terms of the goal. Both goalkeepers making pretty good saves throughout to sort of keep the score down. But as I say, it doesn't matter how they get it done. It's the fact that they have. And for Reading, that is hugely important. It just lifts them off the that nil point sort of area in terms of the no victories, and puts them in a really good spot in terms of being able to. It's a word you always come back to, Seb, sort of springboarding on. Yes. And that is something I think that they're in that situation to be able to do now, because they've got the players they've brought in recently as well, brought in some top quality additions to really strengthen that squad further. And there's no reason why they can't push on now after just, as I say, getting the monkey off their back by beating Port Vale.
Absolutely. Obviously, Paddy Lane coming in over the summer from Portsmouth. Just quickly on this, Reading beat Port Vale. Port Vale, another one of the sides not able to yet to have the first victory of the season, obviously under Darren Moore. They managed to beat Birmingham in the Cup last week, which is sort of really impressive, but have not quite been able to bring that forward into the league action. Is that a concern? I guess they have just come up from League Two. Obviously, might take them a bit of time, but there's been positive glimpses. But is it a concern that they get the first win?
I think you have to say yes, don't you? They're the only promoted team who haven't started well. I know Wimbledon obviously lost on Saturday, lost to one of the other promoted teams in terms of Bradford. But Bradford and Doncaster at this very early stage of the season are in the playoff places. Wimbledon are floating around mid-table. They've all three of them started this season either well or very well, and then that leaves Port Vale in a really difficult patch. They've been unlucky at times. That Cardiff game springs to mind in terms of an offside call that went against them. And they've had that little bit of luck go against them early on in the season. That I think probably balances out, a big pardon, over the entirety of the campaign. And they needn't be rash, Port Vale. They've got a good manager in Darren Moore. They've had a good summer. They've got a few good League One quality additions. They probably need a bit more on the attacking line, especially losing their main man up top to Plymouth more recently. I had to scratch my mind a little bit there. But they're, I wouldn't worry. I feel like it's a difficult thing to say when it's not your club, isn't it? Because if you're a Port Vale fan, perhaps you are worried that the situation you're currently in terms of not having that first win on the board, in terms of just lacking a little bit, especially up top, as I say. But looking from the outside, you probably can see, and sort of it will probably work itself out. They need a bit of work doing before the end of the window, though. It must be said. But I mean, what do you make to it? I'd be interested to see what Port Vale fans think as well, if they sort of comment, whether they're watching or listening to this, how they view this start to the season. But what do you make to it, sir?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they're slightly unlucky in that the other sides that have come up have done quite well. And you mentioned there sort of in terms of some of the quality that they do have. If you look at the sort of the spine of the team, I think there's some real quality amongst that. You've got Cameron Humphreys in the back line. You've got Mo Fowl and Ronan Curtis leading the line too, which, certainly Mo Fowl spent quite a bit of time at the top end of League Two. And Ronan Curtis played in League One for quite a while as well. And George Byers right in the middle of the park, obviously started with Sheffield Wednesday a few years ago. So there is quality there. I don't disagree with you in terms of sort of strengthening that attacking option. But I'm surprised they've not really picked up that positive results really so far this season because of the qualities they have, because of the manager that there is. But maybe it's just one of those things that are yet to click properly, or they still do need that extra squad depth or something, along those lines. I think they're doing the right things. It's just a case of waiting for that moment for it to click and waiting for that first victory. And once that comes, then I'm thinking it will be floodgates to an extent. But yeah, I wouldn't be massively worried. I think they are doing the right things, showing promising signs. They just need to show them a little bit more consistently. And I guess that moves us on nicely to a team that haven't been showing consistency, and that is Plymouth Argyle. It's another defeat for them on Saturday, and this one by quite a thumping, Jamie.
Yeah, a thumping indeed, this one. 4-0 it was to Cardiff in the end. 2 goals in either half, but that doesn't tell the entire story. It was a very bitty sort of 35, 40 minutes, and then a quick-fire double before the break completely turned the game around, because going in at the break 0-0, going in the break 2-0 down, it's just a completely different picture, and that game is almost over at that point for Plymouth side, who have started this season poorly. And then the third comes, and then it is truly game over. It could have been a lot worse. The goalkeeper, Ashby Hammond, keeping it 2-4, which is never a positive thing to be saying. Cardiff were exceptional, really quite easy on the eye, and I think there is probably time we can reflect on Brian Barry Murphy and how well he has gelled this team together so early on in the season. A real reliance on young players, real reliance on quality young players as well, and they're looking in tip-top shape in this early stage of the campaign. It's worth mentioning some really nice appreciation for Sol Bamba a year on from his passing. It was lovely to see that moment. We're sort of remembering him out at Cardiff. So that is sort of doing it for him a little bit in this game, weren't there? There was some nice photographs coming out of it as well after the game. In terms for Plymouth, though, they have read this one on Twitter earlier on today, or X, I should say. 4 wins in their last 49 away games. Booed off at the end of this one. That needs to turn around, and they just look a little bit sort of lacking in all departments. Not in terms of players, perhaps, but just in terms of that attitude at the minute. And it's a very difficult puzzle for Tom Cleverley to solve, and it's a very difficult situation for those fans to be in as well. But Cardiff, absolutely exemplary, and making the most and taking advantage of those sort of moments, getting that first goal, then turning it so quickly into a second. And that game is almost beyond Plymouth at that point. And they see it out well in the second half. So a very good Plymouth side, a very good Cardiff side, I beg your pardon, a very poor Plymouth side. It shows you the difference, doesn't it, Seb, between two teams that have come down and how different they are already.
For sure, yeah. And I guess sort of one thing to note on Cardiff as well is the quality of the finishes as well, particularly the first one from Wintle right into that top corner. A couple of other deflected strikes from distance as well, obviously as part of this one. But the quality in the strikes there just superb from Cardiff, really. such a young squad already, but they're already showing quality, and that's what you need really in this division. You need the quality, you need just moments of magic, and Cardiff have come at the trumps with that no ends really in this one. And as for Plymouth, we spoke last week in terms of first victory of the season against Blackpool. Could have used that as a bit of a springboard, a bit of a platform, a bit of momentum building perhaps. We almost saw that in the midweek when they drew away at Championship side Swansea in the Carabao Cup, but then were knocked out on penalties. So again, they had a bit of momentum gone against them, and then really to get the result that they managed to sort of find themselves at the back of, it's got to be disappointing massively, really. And yeah, just the one league defeat, one league victory so far this season. Concerns, question marks on Cleverly. Something's not right really at Plymouth there. It's similar to what I mentioned earlier on in terms of they've got a nice spine, they've got quality players in there. They're just not clicking. They're not gelling. They're not picking up these results that perhaps people thought they might have done. And I'm struggling really to point my finger at why. Because you've got yourself a good manager, you've got yourself the quality players. You mentioned earlier on in terms of the striker in from Port Vale pretty recently. Victor he's had a pretty good track record while he was there. Some of the players from last season are still about, and yes, it was pretty disappointing in the Championship, but actually a lot of those were there when Plymouth got up in the first place. So yeah, it's a concern for me, Plymouth.
Is it a mentality problem, do you think? I think that's the only thing I can sort of come up with. And they have brought in some good players. You mentioned Tolaj, Caleb Watts, he scored on debut, but hasn't really shone since. Alex Mitchell, the defender, more recently, who was absolutely superb at Lincoln a couple of seasons ago now, sort of been derailed a little bit since then. He'll be helping to get sort of back on the right track with this move. They have some good players, as you mentioned there, but yeah, it's just not quite clicking. And I'm going to point the finger towards that. The mentality a little bit like I did with Peterborough, and it's just there is a missing ingredient somewhere, isn't there? And I don't think it is an extra player. I don't think that solves the problem at all.
No, for sure. Yeah. Something just isn't quite right at the club, and there was all this talk. We spoke about this a bit last week. There was this talk when Cleverly came in, and he was managing high-end Championship last year with Watford, and here he's now sort of rooted to the bottom of the League One table with Plymouth. So early days, but something's not quite right at Plymouth. And yeah, maybe it's a mentality problem. Maybe it's just sort of the still of a hangover from last season in terms of the disappointment of relegation. Maybe perhaps, and who knows? But something's got to change, and fast, I think.
And they've got
Plymouth.
Stockport and Luton next up, which it doesn't get any easier in terms for Plymouth with two really big teams to come next up. So yeah, it's a difficult patch they're in, and if someone is going to get them out of it, I think Clever's in that position of he would be the man able to do it. So we'll see how he gets on over the next few weeks.
Yeah, we certainly will. Now on to the half of the podcast that myself and Jamie have been looking forward to the most. So it's the part where we can both gloat about our teams and our success of the results at the weekend. I'll go first in terms of the all Yorkshire affair between Barnsley and Huddersfield. Not quite the result I was expecting, but as turned out in my favour in terms of Barnsley coming out of this one 3-1 victorious against Huddersfield Town, who have started the season really strongly. So far under Lee Grant, the new gaffer, slightly helped, I think, in this one by an Owen Goodman red card, the Huddersfield Town goalkeeper coming out of his area. And how could I put this? Karate chopping, maybe. There's a not chopping, but there's a karate high boot esque. It's just outside of his area, and was deemed a red card offence, and rightly so, Jamie.
Yeah, it's a bad one. That it is a really, really bad one. It finished 3-1 to Barnsley. Before the red card, actually, Goodman sort of gifted a goal. He sort of parried the ball straight to Davis Kilodun, who wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth as he tapped that one away. He had a very similar goal for his second, the third of the game. as he put away a parried save by the goalkeeper. Luca Connell had a nice goal in between the two of them. And aside from a really awful bit of defending at the end to provide Joe Taylor with a consolation goal, if you haven't seen that, is worth checking out. A good bit of comedy value from Barnsley defence to get that consolation goal. But it doesn't matter in the end because a really important and a really big 3 points and a statement of intent, really, against a top Huddersfield side who have been looking very good so far this season. But Owen Goodman, it is worth taking a moment just to look at that red card, because it seems in reading around that it is the high boot that it's been given for, and the boot was above waist height. He was rushing out towards David McGoldrick, but the other aspect of it as well is this elbow that looks on a couple of angles to catch David McGoldrick. So I mean, I've seen a few arguments of the foot isn't high enough for it to be a red card. Well, even if his foot's on the floor, he's elbowed David McGoldrick across the face. It's a red card, and it's a really bad one as well. I don't know sort of the threshold that these sort of decisions get boosted beyond 2 or 3 games, but if something is going to get boosted beyond that, it could be something like this, really, because that is a very dangerous tackle to be making and throwing your arm, I beg your pardon, like he did. It's really, really... it's just awful, really awful bit of football.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what he was thinking, really. He's come rushing out, hasn't he, towards David McGoldrick, and completely missed everything apart from David McGoldrick's face. And it was just a really sort of rash moment.
Yeah, I don't really get it, because actually David McGoldrick is not the fastest guy on the pitch. So actually, you know what I mean? It's not as though he was going to be neck and neck between the goalkeeper, and they had quite a distance to travel as well. He would have just been better staying on his goal line, but fortunately, but the Huddersfield were already 1-0 down at that point, I think. When Goodman got
they were. The goal had already come. It doesn't take away from the Barnsley victory.
Oh,
they
not
were
at all.
1-0 up. They were playing well, and you would expect them to have gone on anyway to have won the game. But yeah, a peculiar sending off, and I think a really bad one on Goodman's part.
Yeah, and like I said, sort of Lee Nichols coming off the bench didn't help himself with the third and final goal, in terms of, again, parrying it straight to the feet of David Gleedon. So yeah, good statement of intent from Barnsley in that one. Huddersfield started the season so strongly, as we mentioned, but it's actually the Reds that sit above Huddersfield in the table. You know, early days, of course, but we've stopped them in their tracks.
You've got to gloat while you can. It'll come to me in a couple of minutes when we talk about Doncaster. We've got to make the most of it, haven't we, at this early stage of the season?
We have, absolutely. I mean, but before you do go on to chat about Doncaster, we'll chat a bit about the game that was at the Sinsel Bank and involved Lincoln and Mansfield. I guess the big one in this, well, he finished one apiece, we should add, in terms of 1 goal each. But the big talking point in this is another red card, but this one for a defender rather than a goalkeeper.
Yes, nicely batched together and a good segue there. It's a red card for Sonny Bradley in this one. He scored and then got sent off 0-0. He was in that first half. It was a nice little finish as well. His goal with James Collins being the provider. He's one away, I think it is, from 200 career league goals. So he will be sort of itching to get that mark ticked off. But Sonny Bradley scoring, as I say, but soon sent off, and it causes big problems in that Lincoln defence, because they are very light in those defensive areas, and this really doesn't help matters for them with only a couple of days to go of the summer window. There's been a little bit of debate over it, and Michael Skubala, who isn't often one to wear his heart on his sleeve, at least visibly. He's pretty cool, calm, collected sort of guy. That's how he comes across in interviews, but in this interview, it was very much the opposite. It was really quite fiery, passionate, I think is the word I would use. And he was really quite furious about this decision. And I can understand the point of view. There are 2 ways you can look at it for reasons against this red card. One being that, was he actually the last man? Because there is a defender covering around the back of Sonny Bradley, who the referee, and I'm going to agree on that regard, that wasn't quite there in time for it to make a difference in terms of being last man or not. But the other aspect to it was the ball was sent forward and a Mansfield player was in an offside position, was stood pretty much just in front of Sonny Bradley, who just stopped for some reason. It fell to a different Mansfield player, and then he ran through and was taken down. And it was a lapse of concentration. The argument being that he was interfering with play, being where he was in front of one of the Lincoln defenders before Sonny Bradley was forced into this pretty rash challenge. And I think it is a red card, despite those two factors, because they've just completely switched off, and everybody on the pitch is interfering with play because they're in the game. I mean, he hasn't touched the ball, he hasn't stopped the defender getting to the ball. So I think it's a bit storm in a teacuppy, really, with that particular red card. But to Lincoln's credit, they played really well before that, and afterwards they defended really quite resolutely. Only a couple of chances Mansfield had. They did put one of them away, earning this point, which was probably a fair reflection overall. They were 11 versus 11. You'd fancy Lincoln to get the job done because they were looking really strong before the red card came. As I say, Mansfield just the couple of chances, a pretty fair result, I think, overall. But a pretty chaotic one to talk about, that big talking point, obviously, in the first half.
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth adding as well, Mansfield made a quadruple change at half-time. So brought on Cargill, Hendry, McLaughlin and Dwyer off the bench at the break. So evidently sort of those all helped spark a bit of a comeback, and it was then the other substitute, Mariah Welsh, that got the equaliser late on. So yeah, I think Lincoln will be disappointed in terms of not being able to hang on, but I think you're right in terms of all things considered. A point is about fair, and for either of these sides as well, I think Mansfield would have taken a point as well. In terms of travelling to the Snowdon Bank, obviously not an easy place to go, but they would have absolutely taken a point had you offered it them at the start, I am sure. So now sort of on to the final game we're going to look at in depth, and Jamie, I guess over to you with the beaming smile and the bragging rights and the old South Yorkshire clash.
Yeah, the first since 2019 that the Doncaster have beaten Rotherham. There's been a few bad results, really bad results in those years since. We've not played Rotherham an awful lot. I mean, they're very happy to remind us that we've been in lower divisions for a good chunk of those in between years. But victory for Doncaster in this one. I know in Bailey with it, with the one goal, it finished 1-0. The early kick-off. He has 5 already in all competitions. The Doncaster captain, Mr. Reliable, I'd often describe him as. And he is definitely sticking with that, making the difference, standing tallest to flick in a really nice cross from James Maxwell. And Doncaster had plenty of chances to make it much more than one. Middleton hit the bar, Nixon the post, Broadbent put one just over, Ajayi really late on put one just over that would have been nice, sort of the icing on the cake in injury time. They played really well, I thought, Doncaster, and just looked really strong. And they just didn't look like conceding. Conor O'Riordan, who's on loan from Blackburn Rovers, and he was next to Matty Pearson, who of course came in from Huddersfield in the summer. And defensively, they were absolutely solid as a rock, and just kept a pretty tall, a pretty physical Rotherham front line completely at bay. So very impressive stuff from Doncaster as they continue this good start to the season. Rotherham, on the other hand, were very much missing Sam Nombe in terms of that extra injection of quality, maybe is the word for it, or at least a bit of spark up front, someone to make something happen, because they were definitely lacking that. And as I said, they just didn't look like scoring. They were getting in good areas, but then just not creating a chance out of it. And that happened really quite a lot. And they just weren't a threat up front. Sheriff, who scored on his debut, was a little bit unable to impact the game. Atete, who was next to him, spent more time arguing with the referee, especially early on, got himself booked for kicking the ball away. Very sort of in the first half, quite early on in the game. And they just looked pretty away from things. Hugo, who came on, went closest. A volley he put just wide. But apart from that, they really just didn't look a threat at all. And things need to turn around there a little bit. Obviously, the injury is a bit of a caveat you can put against them in terms of Sanombe's absence. But Rotherham, they just didn't have anything about them really. Whereas Doncaster's main problem has been someone to put away chances. and they signed a striker. Well, it's been tumbling away for the week, but it was announced after the game. Osolana, who's coming in on loan from Houston Dynamos. Quite the change. Houston Doncaster. I'm not quite sure he's got the good end of that deal. It has to be said, but he's apparently he's sort of the way he's spoken about. He's very quick. He's very good through the channels, and that is exactly what Doncaster need up front. Someone to put balls into, who's going to get on the end of them, and then you hope put them away, a bit like Rob Street did the second half of last season. And that could be the final piece of the puzzle. So I don't want to get too ahead of myself because we're looking very good at this early stage of the season. And with a striker who can, on routine, get in really good positions, because Billy Sharp's looking very isolated at times, playing as a sole man up front, really not suited to that role. We could be a real threat over the coming parts of the season. So all is looking rosy in my part of South Yorkshire.
He's getting giddy. He's getting himself carried away. Just a couple of points, I guess, before we go into the final games and final results elsewhere. Owen Bailey just has a magnificent head on him, doesn't he? He's not the tallest guy in the squad at all, but every time he scores, it's always with his head. Every time there's a great delivery in, he's always underneath it, and it's remarkable, really, isn't it? In terms of he's not, like I said, not the tallest man on the earth, but how much quality he possesses from his noggin, really.
Yeah, well, exactly that. And I mean, he's been there now for a good few years, and he's never missed a league game since coming to the club. He's just unbelievable. And no matter, whatever you think maybe he won't be able to do that. He does it absolutely amazingly. He was a centre mid, more defensively. They pushed him sort of last season into more an attacking midfield position. He was playing right back at times early on this season because Jamie Sterry's been out injured, and now he's come back into midfield. There were times during games when Nixon marauds forward that he comes back into right back. So he's absolutely everywhere. I'd love to see sort of his touch map or his passing map of where he is on the pitch, because he covers every blade of grass, and then sort of slides into the box and flicks his head on things, sort of clambering over defenders. Ricky Charlesworth, who was the Doncaster Free Press reporter, described it as Haaland-esque, as he sort of climbed all over the defender and flicked it on. Sort of with the top of his head. He's been absolutely superb, and long may it continue, really. I mean, it's absolutely miraculous. I got a message off one of my friends that says, is he playing up front now? Because he's got 5 goals in this really short space of time at the start of the season. It's all been a bit miraculous, really, with Owen Bailey. And he's becoming the focal point almost by accident, because sort of missing that killing edge striker, as I mentioned. So, it's really just quite unbelievable.
Yeah, of course, the skipper at Doncaster as well. And just finally on Rotherham, you mentioned that their attacking woes. They'll be disappointed in terms of Martin Sharif. Came off the bench last weekend. We spoke about the impact he had, scoring on debut, and then he went off at half-time, and we think he's suffered a bit of an injury. We're not quite sure the extent of that, but I think Matt Hamshaw spoke afterwards in terms of that he'll be out for a bit of time, a few weeks. I think they were hoping at least. That probably just sums Rotherham's problems up, I think, doesn't it, in terms of their attacking output?
Yeah, they are a little bit unlucky, it has to be said, for them. As much as they were poor in this game, the luck never seems to be with them. And I'm sure has definitely fell on the wrong side of that a few times.
Absolutely, yeah. So the rest of the results is next up. So we'll head on to Bloomfield Road. It finished Blackpool 1, Bolton Wanderers 1. Blackpool still only with 1 win in the league so far this season. Also finished 1 apiece between Wigan and Stockport. Bradford City took the lead and won a 5-goal thriller against AFC Wimbledon. They actually went 2-1 down in this one, but obviously came out eventual 3-2 winners. Luton Town, impressive and dominant in a 3-0 victory against Burton Albion. Meanwhile, Leyton Orient suffered a 1-0 defeat to Northampton. Sam Hoskins with the goal, and I guess the worries and rumbles continue for Leyton Orient and their poor start to the season. And Stevenage continue their great start to the campaign with a 1-0 victory over Wickham. That leaves Stevenage in second place, behind the team that we spoke about earlier.
Cardiff.
And that was Cardiff. You clearly got a better memory than I have, but that does mean the result does mean that Wickham are one of 3 teams without a win still, and the other 2 we obviously spoke about in detail as well. So that's it for this week's review episode. Myself and Jamie will be back same time next week, and before then you can catch the transfer deadline day live stream on the YouTube page. I'm sure more details will be shared over the Football Deck social media channels, but that will be on Monday night. Jamie and Sam, and you can catch Sam and Callum back discussing the next week's fixtures during the week after the deadline has closed. So plenty of action to get your teeth stuck into. But for myself and Jamie, until next time.